On August 2nd and 4th, 1964, the North Vietnamese fired directly upon two U.S. ships in international waters, otherwise known as the Gulf of Tonkin Incident. Congress responded to this incident with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving the president the authority to escalate U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Over 8.7 million soldiers had served in Vietnam by the time it ended in 1975, 11 years later. The majority of men who served disproportionately came from rural and urban working class backgrounds and were, on average, only 19 years of age. These young men were poorly prepared for what they would see in Vietnam, but nothing could prepare them for the amount of casualties they would suffer. From 1964 to 1975, the United States suffered over 200,000 casualties, 58,000 deaths, and over 153,000 wounded. Tom Timberg was born in 1954 in a small town in Minnesota and joined the Army in May of 1973.
Graduate in 1972 with my class. I moved out and went on my own. I started doing jobs, various jobs during the summer of 72. By the spring of 73, the economy had soured. That was when the gas crisis started. Started the recession, and there wasn't a lot of opportunities, so I started trying to find a way to move forward, and I found the Army to be probably the best answer for me at the time.
His service in the military was in the same time frame as when many American soldiers in Vietnam were being sent home. He witnessed what life was like and heard about many tragic stories from these returning veterans.
By 73, when I went in, the peace accord had been signed, and so we were withdrawing from the war. It was still going on. The people coming back, obviously, it's pretty well known that weren't very well received. In my neighborhood, my town, not a lot of guys went to the war because they were in college, so they had college deferment. They could afford to go to college, so then they could avoid the war, the draft. When I joined, it was pretty unusual for someone to join the Army. I knew of no one that had gone into the Army or the military at that time. I was using it as a way to try and move on and get myself on a better track. It wasn't for rah reasons, you know. But I was looked at as kind of, what are you doing? What do you mean you go in the Army? And so the sentiment was still kind of negative towards military people at the time.
Instead of coming home with their units like in previous wars, soldiers returned home from Vietnam individually. Soldiers came home to a cold welcome from the American public. Tom's perception of the poor treatment of American soldiers in the United States is far more favorable than the reality of their situation. Soldiers were portrayed as baby killers, psychos, drug addicts, and warmongers. They were also spit on and blamed directly responsible for the war, saying that if it weren't for them, then there wouldn't be a war.
When I was in the military, from 73 to 76, guys were matriculating back from Vietnam that had seen action, and they all were kind of like a little edgy. Like when we go on maneuvers and we'd bivouac out, and we'd just go out for a couple of weeks and make camp or whatever and set up bases. Those guys were completely different than the rest of us as far as how they set up their area and stuff. It's like they were not afraid, but they weren't going to have anybody sneak up on them. There was always this edge to them that they were aware that, that they'd been in stuff where if you didn't pay attention every minute of every day somehow, even when you're sleeping, somebody could kill you. And so they had a different twist to them, and a lot of them were, I wouldn't call them big drinkers, but there was drugs in the military too, just like there was in society at the time. And some of those guys over in Vietnam, there was more drugs that they could get or have access to, and some of them brought that baggage back with them. Some of them brought wives back with them. They hooked up with a Vietnamese girl or whoever, Cambodian, and married, or brought them back when they got married. So definitely those guys that I met that had come back had a different edge to them than us that had volunteered or just come in the last couple of years, 73, 72, 73, 74. As far as home, those guys were older. Excuse me. The guys that went in, they were like 4 or 5 years older, and I've heard some stories, or oh, he was in Nam or whatever, but never personally did I know some of my hometown that had come back from the story. Showed up at the 82nd Airborne. I was shocked as you walk in the barracks, and it was like everybody's room had the smell of pot coming out of it. And a lot of it came from Vietnam because it was so prevalent over there. That was, more so than the general population was getting its pot from Mexico. I mean, that was Acapulco Gold was the standard, which was just crappy stuff from Mexico. But over there, they had Thai stick and different kinds of hash and lots of different things you could smoke, and those guys from the military kind of brought that culture back with them. So the barracks, I was shocked because, well, why they let these guys do this? This is against the law, but the guys, the sergeants and the upper enlisted men would just turn their head to it and just let it go. They didn't worry about it, But these are the ones, the guys that come back, they figure, well, the guy's been out in the jungle for 2 years, leave him alone, I mean, he'll be done here in a year.
Unfortunately, many soldiers also were turned on to heroin while in Vietnam. By the end of the war, about 40,000 soldiers were addicted to the drug. When they came back from Vietnam, they would be sick for months because they didn't have access to the drug and were suffering from withdrawals. Some soldiers attempted to bring back their addictions from overseas by smuggling drugs back into their country. Some were stopped, but unfortunately, some were successful. The veteran situation was a tough one, especially with little to no support. Many developed illnesses after the war, such as cancer, liver disease, and rashes, mostly due to exposure to Agent Orange. Having seen the horrors of Vietnam, many veterans were physiologically scarred and had nightmares and anxiety attacks, causing flashbacks and terror from loud noises. These were all common behaviors amongst veterans. Many survivors of Vietnam suffered mental and emotional disorders and showed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. However, many were unable to get the help they needed and deserved because they were perceived as crazy and dangerous. Also, government medical and educational aids were not made available to them right away. Many felt abandoned by the country they served.